wanted to share this background with you guys. Even adults pretend. No treaty, no annexation. Provisional government, insurgent president Stanford B. Dole, the U.S. Ambassador Sewell, supposedly accepting Hawaii and so-called ceding the lands from Hawaii to the United States. 1898 ceremony of cession. So yes, students, even adults pretend. Yeah, no treaty, no annexation. Mahele Ekolu, United States seizure of the Hawaiian Islands. Mokuna Evalu, annexation by deception. Overthrow of the Hawaiian government. On January 17, 1893, we discussed this already. The U.S. Minister Stevens recognized the provisional government as a de facto government. Successful revolution. And don't forget, as we mentioned last class period, he had to have control of the government facilities, the military, the government offices, the government structure, and of course, having the backing of the people, which we already know that didn't happen. Through the smoking gun we shared last class period with January 16th, the troops were landed. And of course, Minister Stevens' letter to Dole, Judge Dole at the time, telling him not to let anyone know that he recognized them as a de facto or matter of fact government before they were successfully before they're in successful control of all the government parts. Yeah. February 15, 1893, Secretary of State Foster reported to President Harrison. Yeah. No public recognition was accorded the provisional government by the United States minister until after the Queen's abdication, and when they were in effective possession of the government buildings, the archives, the treasurer, the barracks, the police station, and all the potential machinery of the government. And so again, this is what was told to President Harrison, which is told to the Secretary of State by the insurgent government, aka Dole and gang, the provisional government. Yeah, and so we actually debunked that. We know that that's not real, that they were not in control, and the Queen actually surrendered on January 17th. The power of her executive power of the government to the President of the United States. And so we know with the two letters that we shared last class period that this has been debunked already. Under international law, states have an obligation to not intervene in the internal affairs of another. Yeah. So they have a duty, not just an obligation, to not interfere with another country. De facto recognition of a government is as a result of a successful revolution. So, and again, just like in the American Revolution against Great Britain, they were considered insurgents. Upon their successful revolution and then being recognized by the British Crown as 13 independent countries or independent states, then they were the de facto recognition or de facto recognition of that government was given, not before. Yeah, and since we know the provisional government did not have control, did not have all these pieces being recognized as a de facto government by Minister Stevens before they actually were, is a violation of international law. Secretary of State Foster stated to U.S. Minister Stevens on January 28, 1893, the rule of this government has uniformly been to recognize and enter into relations with any actual government in full possession of effective power with the assent of the people. All right, so now here's a different story, right? We're talking about, a few days after the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. And he's, again, telling Stevens, hey, U.S. government, we only enter into these things with recognized, successful revolutionaries. We don't recognize them as de facto governments just because they are insurgents, right? So again, review President Cleveland's investigation in his final report. Remember what he said, no man can reasonably doubt the truth of the statements of the witnesses that Mr. Stevens had recognized the provisional government before they went to, and now remember, he didn't have the smoking gun yet. He just, from all his interviews and the 1,300 pages of interviews and accounts, this is what he came up with, that they were recognized before. Cleveland's message here on December 18th, 1893, and this is what he tells Congress here, the lawful government of Hawaii was overthrown without the drawing of a sword or the firing of a shot, by a process every step of which it may safely be asserted is directly traceable to the dependent for its success upon the agency of the United States. So summing it up, he just said, like, they were able to take over the Hawaiian Kingdom government because the U.S.'s involvement, all right, in direct violation of international law. So here's the proof of intervention, right? We talked about it again, the smoking gun. January 17, 1893, show the direct violation of international law and the United States' direct involvement in the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. The original government as a U.S. puppet, the recent uncovering of this private note in 2016 by U.S. Minister John Stevens is proof of the collusion and intervention of the United States. Blount had no direct proof, right, of this. He didn't have that smoking gun. He didn't have that paper, but he came to the same conclusions. Again, that intervention in the internal affairs of independent and sovereign state happened, right? The United States intervened in a foreign country's affairs. He came to that conclusion from all his interviews that he did throughout that whole time here in Hawaii. It also confirms the provisional government status as a U.S. puppet and negates all foreign recognition it received after January 17th, 1893. So, with that being said, under international law, everything after January 17, 1893 is in direct violation of international law. Reminder, the independent state here, the Hawaiian Kingdom, okay, had its own government. The government was illegally overthrown, not the state, right? And so here we go. As a result of the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government by the United States on January 17, 1893, there were two executive agreements entered into between the President Grover Cleveland and Queen Liliuokalani that brought about a peaceful settlement. The first agreement, Liliuokalani Assignment, binds the U.S. President and all of his successors to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law. That's what we're asking for. We're not asking for the United States to immediately depart right now. What we're saying is follow their own executive agreement that they signed with the Queen. As you mentioned last class, executive agreement, the president has the right to do that, and it is considered a treaty because the executive power has the right to make agreements with other executive powers. The second agreement, called the Restoration Agreement, binds the U.S. president and his successors to restore the Hawaiian Kingdom government and the monarch to grant the pardon to the insurgents. According to Professor Quincy Wright, the president binds himself and his successors in office by executive agreements. So every executive agreement that they make, it binds the office of the president. They have to follow that executive agreement. Statements of a decision on fact or policy authorized by the president must be accepted by foreign nations as the will of the United States. And again, Professor Quincy, a constitutional law professor, so this is his expert opinion. Okay. The other thing too, we look at where we're at today. The things that Trump is saying out there. Remember, when the president speaks, it supposedly represents all of the United States, and that's the powerful part about the impeachment process that President Trump just went through. What that process is saying that as the president speaks, it tells the other nations, other foreign powers of the world, he does not represent all of the people of America because he has a no faith vote of impeachment. Yeah, it didn't kick him out, it didn't push him out of office, but it lets the world know that what he's saying is not what all Americans believe, right? It's not backed up by everyone. Annexation by exception. Senator Morgan here, chairman of Senate Foreign Relations Committee, held hearings to vindicate U.S. diplomat John Stevens and Captain Wilkes of the USS Boston. Now, this is super important for you to understand. When the executive person, okay, James Blount, was part of the executive branch or the presidential branch, and he did the interviews and he did his report called the Blount Report, right? And gave his findings. And then now here's Senator Morgan. Now, Senator Morgan does not work for the president. Senator Morgan actually works for the legislature. And the difference is this, is that Blount, his power comes from the branch that deals with foreign countries, executive branch. Morgan, his powers comes from the legislative branch that deals within a country, municipal, okay? Again, when we say to vindicate, he did an investigation, but his investigation was merely to find out facts or supposed facts dealing directly with Stevens and Captain Wilkes. It had nothing to do with the overthrow or interactions with the, finding the truth of that. His whole goal is to vindicate them. Again, it's from a different branch. Remember, the legislature only works within the United States. And so he's basically, his report was a report report on the trial of treason, right? That's what his report was on. It wasn't actually doing the same exact function as Blount, but yet today in history, people will compare the two and say which one is right, which one is wrong. You've got to remember, Blount, executive, dealing with foreign countries and international. Yeah, Morgan, municipal, legislature, dealing within the United States and has no bearing outside of the United States. Okay, annexation by deception. On January 20th, 1894, Stevens testified under oath before the U.S. Foreign Relations Committee and committed perjury. This is what Senator Morgan asked him. On that day, which was Tuesday, had you visited the government building? Stephen said, I did not leave the legation or the embassy from Monday evening until several days after, remained constantly in the legation. Senator Morgan, was it your purpose in anything you did from the time you left the Boston, that's the ship, USS Boston, on Saturday up until your making of an official recognition in writing for the purpose of dethroning the Queen? This is what he says. Not the slightest. Absolutely non-interference was my purpose. Now, we already have legal documents that say it. We have Blount's report that says it. History already shows that this is a lie. It's perjury. He did this under oath, yeah? Annexation by deception. U.S. House Resolution February 7th, 1894, that we heartily approve the principle announced by the President of the United States that interference with the domestic affairs of an independent nation is contrary to the spirit of American institutions, that the people of that country should have had absolute freedom and independence in pursuing their own line of policy, and that foreign intervention in the political affairs of the islands will not be regarded with indifference by the government of the United States. Whoa. So after the president shares what happened and gives the lowdown, this is what the House says. Like, hey, Hawaiians shouldn't have been interfered with Americans shouldn't have interfered with the Hawaiian Kingdom, right? Freedom, their own choice. U.S. Senate passes this resolution in May, okay, of that same year. That of the right it belongs wholly to the people of the Hawaiian Islands to establish and maintain their own form of government and domestic policy, that the United States ought in no wise to interfere therewithin, and that any intervention in the political affairs of these islands by any other government be regarded as an act unfriendly to the United States. So now the Senate is saying the same thing as the House. If anybody messes with Hawaii, yes, that's considered an act of war, right? An act unfriendly to the United States. Okay, and so this is what the House and the Senate is saying regarding the situation of the overthrow, the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. Annexation by deception. The failure on the part of the United States president to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law and then to restore the Hawaiian Kingdom government allowed the insurgents to gain strength by hiring mercenaries and renamed themselves the Republic of Hawaii on July 4th, 1894. Guess why they picked that day? That aligns with the American Independence Day, right? And so aligning their holidays with America. Again, adults pretend, yeah? And so here we go. Again, the president is supposed to come in now because he has control and he's occupying Hawaii and institute the laws of occupation, which basically is the Hawaiian Kingdom laws. When you occupy a territory, you have to enforce the territories that places laws. And so that's what was supposed to have happened. But because it didn't happen right away, it allowed them to bring on the Honolulu Rifle, the mercenaries that came in, armed mercenaries. And by the way, which was illegal back in the Hawaiian Kingdom to have guns, they had to hide them and sneak them into the country. So without a pardon from the Queen, the insurgents continued to remain insurgents. So that means until this day, yeah, they're dead. Yeah. But as we'll talk about later, war crimes, they don't expire. Annexation by deception. On January 16, 1895, Queen Liliuokalani was arrested on a so-called charge of misprison of treason or knowledge of treason. They're blaming her for being treasonous. And again, we've all heard these stories about how they did a mock trial, found her guilty in a kangaroo court, not following kingdom laws. The whole goal here was to get her to abdicate the throne, but to embarrass her and to crush her and crush the dreams of our people, to make us believe that we are, powerless and that the monarchy is over and all these types of things, right? The insurgents had no authority because they're insurgents. They're criminals, committed high treason against the Hawaiian Kingdom and is also verified by the United States. But their intent was to humiliate our queen. After President William McKinley enters office on March 4th, 1897, he prepares to meet with the insurgents in a second attempt to acquire the Hawaiian Islands by Treaty of Cession. Second attempt in the same recent history. Okay, the first attempt to annex by treaty was signed between President Harrison and the insurgents on February 14th. Because they're not legal, that's nothing, right? The treaty was removed from the Senate by President Cleveland, okay, and superseded by the executive agreements that he signed. The second treaty is signed on June 16, 1897, Washington, D.C., okay? Cession is between sovereign states. by treaty means a bilateral agreement. So annex, again, and cession is the same word. So in this description here, sovereignty on the left, we have the Hawaiian Kingdom and the Hawaiian Kingdom government. On the right, we have the United States and the United States government. You can notice they're both separate. In order for the countries to be combined or to be annexed or to have cession, right? The sovereignty of the nation, the government, both governments have to sign off. Now, if the provisional government here is signing off, they're not the real government. In fact, they were insurgents. In fact, according to the US President, Grover Cleveland, they are insurgents, that they committed treason. And he wanted to grant them amnesty, and he already signed the executive agreement. So they could not sign over or cede the Hawaiian Kingdom to the United States because one, they're not in charge. Two, the President Cleveland is in charge. He already has executive power. So therefore, this doesn't even make sense. How can President Cleveland and the Hawaiian Kingdom and President Cleveland or McKinley at the US here sign it over to themselves? And remember, every agreement that the president makes, their successors have to follow. So when the two executive agreements are put into place, McKinley is supposed to be following those agreements. So now McKinley has executive power over Hawaii. How, therefore, can he sign over this place to himself? It doesn't work. And this is voluntary cession. Now, involuntary cession is similar, except that it's by conquest, war. So here we go, annexation by deception. Here is the United States, 1803. You know, it's on the right side. That's where 13 colonies are, right? The original states. In 1803, they get this big chunk of the United States through a treaty with the French. 1819, they get this lower part, Florida, from a treaty with the Spanish in 1819. 1846, they get that northern area where Washington and Oregon is through a British treaty. 1848, they get that whole section from Mexico with a Mexican treaty. Now, not all of these places became states right away, but they all became U.S. territory through treaty. Very important, U.S. territories through a treaty. On June 18, 1897, Queen Liliuokalani filed a protest with the United States Department, and the protest letter is basically saying, hey, this is wrong, right? This is an act of war. I declare such a treaty to be an act of wrong towards the native and part native people of Hawaii, an invasion of the rights of the ruling chiefs, in violation of international rights both towards my people and toward friendly nations with whom they have made treaties, the perpetuation of the fraud whereby the constitutional government was overthrown, and finally an act of gross injustice to me as the queen. All right, so she filed that letter of protest. Despite this letter, McKinley still does it. He still submits the treaty, intends to submit the treaty of cession to the United States, even though the facts are laid out for him. Yeah, the Senate reconvenes in December of 1897. So here we go. The men of the Hawaiian Patriotic League, Huialohaina. Yeah, so they come together. There's Joseph Navahi Kalaniʻopuʻu, right? James Kaulia, right? Mrs. Campbell, okay? Mrs. Navahi here. And so again, these men and women were the ones that went in and searched and did all the Kuwait petitions that we already learned about. And so here we go, 21,269 signatures in the petition. There was 2 petitions, so the other one total together came out a little bit less than 40,000 people. But this petition was submitted on behalf of the Patriotic Societies. So Senator George Hora introduced the signature petition, aka the Kuwait petitions, to the United States Senate in December when it reconvened. Now remember, one of the parts of annexation or cession is that the people gotta want to have it. Just this one treaty or one document protest petition here, that's about half already. Just on that one, it's half of the native of Hawaiian subjects in the Hawaiian Kingdom. They said there's 44,000. Just that one alone is half. It's not even counting the other 17,000 the other petition. So by March 1898, these protests succeeded in preventing the so-called Treaty of Cession from being ratified. Remember, in order to become part of the United States, you need a 3/4 vote from the United States in their Senate to also agree. And you need the vote of the people in the other country to agree as well, which they didn't get either. Okay, there are 2 failed attempts to acquire the Hawaiian Islands by Treaty of Cession. So yes, our people stopped it. Yes, our people's voice worked. Yes, we can do that today in whatever form that we need to today to make sure we do take care of what's best for our Aina and best for our people. Annexation by deception. April 25th, 1898, United States declares war against the Kingdom of Spain and fights the Spanish in both Caribbean and the Pacific Oceans. On May 1st, the U.S. occupies the Spanish colonies of the Philippines and Guam. May 4th, 1898, House Representative Francis Newlands submits a resolution of annexation to the House of Committee on Foreign Affairs. Now, a resolution is not session, it's not a treaty, okay, but a congressional action limited in authority to its U.S. territories. Now, remember before, I showed you all those places or land that they acquired through treaties. Now, it's not all of them were states. Some of them were just U.S. territories and later became states, but they became territories through treaty. With Hawaii, there's no treaty. And so the way they claim they control or have power over Hawaii is through a joint resolution, and a resolution only impacts the legislature, only impacts municipal law, domestic law within the United States, and has no bearing on anything outside of its own country. And so here we go. In short, in war, we should need a larger navy to defend the Pacific coast, because we shouldn't have not only to defend our own coast, but to prevent by naval force an enemy from occupying the islands. Whereas if we preoccupy them, fortifications could preserve them to us. So again, talking about here about how they if we preoccupy them and we take Hawaii, they could become ours. Again, this is General Schofield. This one, we got a preemption title to those islands, okay, through the volunteer action of our American missionaries who went there and civilized and Christianized those people and established a government that has no parallel in the history of the world, considering its age. And we made a preemption which nobody in the world thinks of disputing, provided we perfect our title. So again, this is the guy, Schofield Barracks on Oahu. He's claiming that the Americans came, the Americans took over, the Americans established a government, the American, and all these pieces. And what we just learned about this whole school year is that's totally false. And if you don't believe me, the question that you need to ask yourself is, again, if the Americans were involved or in control of the kingdom, why therefore did the descendants of the missionaries, those American missionaries, have to overthrow the government if they already were in control? So we know that his statement is just false. It's kind of like President Trump telling us that we have to like drink hand sanitizer and use UV lights to disinfect the inside of our bodies. Burn. Okay, it's just false. It's a false narrative, yeah. Annexation by deception. On June 1st, a U.S. convoy of ships heading to the war zone in the Philippines entered Honolulu Harbor and again violated Hawaii's neutrality. Okay, a second invasion. By inviting the U.S. troops to the islands in violation of its neutrality, the Republic of Hawaii forced the hand of the United States to annex the islands. This was a strategic move to bring them to Hawaii, to kind of force them to actually take Hawaii over entirely. And now this is the Republic. They changed their name from Provisional Government, the PGs to the PGs, and they changed their name to the Republic of Hawaii on July 4th, remember? And then now, because they made their ships there, that's in violation of international law. And so it kind of forced America to say, hey, well, now we have to make you part of us. This is some feedback from the different senators and people talking story, discussing this whole situation here. Senator White demanded to know what session had been made and what lawyer in the Senate would state there had been a session. Like, where is this? Where is this treaty? That's what he's asking for. He maintained there had been no session, and as there could not have been session without the concurrence of both parties. The resolution is not session, is what he's saying. Now, this is the senator. Here's another quote. The Friends of Annexation, seeing that it was impossible to make a treaty in the manner pointed out by the Constitution, attempted then to nullify the provisions in the Constitution by putting that treaty in the form of a statute. And here we have embodied this provision of the treaty in the joint resolution which comes to us from the House. So the Senate saying, wait, you can't, this is not a treaty. You can't use a joint resolution, right? Despite the constitutional objection, the Congress passed the resolution because you don't need 75% or 3/4 vote to do a municipal law. That doesn't apply anywhere other than the United States. So Congress passes this resolution. McKinley signed it into law on July 7th, 1898. The resolution was disguised to be a treaty. If you look at the statue at McKinley High School, in his hand, he's holding this little thing. In his hand, it's a scroll-looking book thing, and it says Treaty of Annexation. The lie is so deep, yeah? Even adults pretend. Just wrapping it up, annexation by deception, a lot of pieces here were super deceptive. There's a lot of support here from the Americans at that time, supporting the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the point that they believe that the Hawaiian Kingdom should have a power to decide its own fate in government. Over 120 something years of denationalization, our own people don't even know this history. And so now as this history comes back to light and we see it and we see the truth, now we have to start making some decisions on how that impacts us today.